London, 1888. The East End. Whitechapel. A district of crushing poverty, overcrowded rookeries, and gaslit streets where the fog rolls in off the Thames and turns the world into shadow. It is here, in the late summer and autumn of one of history's most famous years, that a killer begins his work. A killer who will never be convicted. A killer whose name is still debated. A killer who will become the most famous mystery in the history of crime. The canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper are Marion Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. All were women working in poverty in Whitechapel. All were killed between August 31 and November 9, 1888. All were subjected to extreme mutilation, their throats cut, their abdomens opened with what the police surgeons described as unusual anatomical knowledge. The murders caused a citywide panic. Scotland Yard assigned its best detectives. The Metropolitan Police received thousands of letters from the public. Vigilante committees patrolled the streets. And then, in September, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency addressed to the boss, signed Jack the Ripper. It may have been from the killer. It may have been a journalist's hoax. Either way, it gave the monster his name. The Dear Boss letter and a second letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, were widely published. Then came the From Hell letter, sent to George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. This one included half a preserved human kidney, which the writer claimed to have taken from one of his victims. Medical analysis at the time suggested it had come from a woman of approximately 45, consistent with Catherine Eddowes. The investigation produced a list of suspects that has grown over 135 years to include hundreds of names. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. Painter Walter Sickert. Barrister Montague Druitt. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream. Each generation adds new candidates. Books are written. Documentaries produced. And for most of that time, the question remained entirely open. Then in 2014, businessman Russell Edwards purchased a shawl at auction allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder on the night of September 30, 1888. Edwards commissioned Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a Finnish scientist specializing in mitochondrial DNA analysis of Victorian-era materials, to extract DNA from stains on the fabric and compare them to the descendants of both the victim and known suspects. The results, published in 2014 and refined in a peer-reviewed study in 2019, identified 2 DNA profiles on the shawl. One matched the mitochondrial DNA of a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes. The other matched a descendant of a woman named Franziska Kosminski, the sister of a man named Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-born Jewish barber who had long been considered one of the primary Ripper suspects. Aaron Kosminski was born in Poland in 1865 and emigrated to London's East End with his family. By 1888 he was living in Whitechapel, the exact area of the murders. He was known to police. One of the lead investigators on the Ripper case, Sir Melville Macnaghten, named Kosminski in a confidential 1894 memorandum as a prime suspect, noting that he had a great hatred of women, especially of the prostitute class. Contemporary police notes also described a witness, believed to be Joseph Lawenda, who saw a man with Catherine Eddowes shortly before her murder. He was later allegedly shown Kosminski in an identification parade and reportedly identified him, but refused to testify in court. Victorian investigators, the notes suggest, were confident enough in Kosminski's guilt that the murders stopped being solved became less urgent. The murders did stop after Kosminski was committed to an asylum in 1891. Kosminski spent the rest of his life in mental institutions, first Coney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, then Leavesden Asylum, where he died in 1919. His records describe a man suffering from severe mental illness, with delusions and a refusal to be washed. Whether he was the Ripper, a convenient scapegoat, or simply a mentally ill man who happened to live in the wrong neighborhood has been debated ever since. The DNA evidence has been contested. Several forensic scientists raised methodological concerns. The Schall's chain of custody was unverified over 130 years, contamination was possible, and mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally and shared by many relatives, making identification statistically challenging. Dr. Lohalainen and Edwards updated their study in 2019 to address some criticisms, but skeptics remain. What the DNA evidence does, even for skeptics, is return the focus to Kosminski. The police at the time believed he was guilty. A witness reportedly identified him. The murders stopped when he was institutionalized. His physical description matched eyewitness accounts of a man seen with victims. No other suspect has this convergence of circumstantial and now forensic indicators. The surgical skill argument, often used to suggest the killer was a doctor, has been significantly re-evaluated by modern pathologists. Dr. Thomas Bond, who examined Mary Kelly's body, specifically stated he did not believe the killer had surgical knowledge. The cuts, while deep and extensive, could have been made by anyone familiar with butchering or slaughtering animals. Kosminski, as a barber, would have had experience with sharp instruments. Mary Jane Kelly's murder on November 9 was the most brutal and the last of the canonical five. Her body was found in her own room at Miller's Court, which meant the killer had privacy and time. The mutilation was extreme. After this killing, the Ripper attacks stopped. If this was Kosminski, his deteriorating mental state may have led to his commitment to care shortly thereafter, ending both him and the killings simultaneously. The Ripper's victims deserve more than their role as evidence in a mystery. Marion Nichols was 43, separated from her husband, surviving on the streets. Annie Chapman was 47, in poor health, last seen selling flowers. Elizabeth Stride was 44, a Swedish immigrant. Catherine Eddowes was 46, a hop picker and occasional sex worker. Mary Jane Kelly was 25, the youngest, and Irish. Each had a life before that autumn. Whitechapel in 1888 was a world of desperate poverty, women sleeping in dosshouses for 4 pence a night, earning pennies doing piecework, surviving on the margins of the most powerful empire in the world. The Ripper case has always been shadowed by class. These were not the kind of women whose deaths typically received sustained police attention. The murders became famous not because of who the victims were, but because of who the killer might be. Today, Whitechapel is part of modern London, gentrified, trendy, a stone's throw from the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf. Jack the Ripper walking tours operate nightly, visiting the approximate sites of murders. Pubs claim association. Plaques are installed. The victims' descendants have argued, passionately, that this tourism is a grotesque commodification of their relatives' murders. They are not wrong. The letters, particularly Dear Boss and From Hell, have been analyzed by forensic linguists, graphologists, and historians for generations. The consensus among many researchers is that Dear Boss was likely a journalist's fabrication, the style too dramatic, the tone too theatrical. From Hell, by contrast, is written differently, rawer, less literate, more disturbing. It may be genuine. It has never been definitively attributed. The Ripper case introduced the world to criminal profiling. In 1888, Dr. Thomas Bond created what may be the first behavioral profile of an unknown serial killer in history, describing the killer as physically strong, composed, daring, possibly without a regular job, and likely known in the neighborhood he operated in. Modern FBI profilers who have reviewed the case broadly agree with his assessment. If Aaron Kosminski was indeed Jack the Ripper, he spent 28 years in an asylum and died there, without ever being tried, without ever confessing, and without the world knowing for certain. His grave, if it exists, is unmarked. His victims are buried in London. The letters remain in archives. And the question that launched 1,000 books is not fully closed, only answered, perhaps, with the best evidence we are likely to ever have. Jack the Ripper is more than a cold case. He is a cultural phenomenon, the shadow figure at the birth of the modern serial killer myth. He shaped detective fiction, forensic science, media coverage of crime, and the public imagination of evil. Whether his name was Aaron Kosminski or someone else entirely, what he did in those 11 weeks in 1888 changed the world's relationship with crime forever. The 5 women of Whitechapel deserve to be remembered for who they were, not just for how they died. And the mystery, still not fully resolved, still contested by historians and forensic scientists, continues to pull at something deep in our need to name what we fear. Jack the Ripper may finally have a name. But the darkness of that autumn has never fully lifted.